Let's look at problem 11 from the review problems. Now this is that really long table, some of which is kind of hard to read. So I've pulled out a few of the, well, I've pulled out the key statistics that you need for the first few parts of number 11 on here. So we have people who are married, widowed, and divorced, and we know what % of them moved in the last 12 months. And the first question asks us, divorced people are how much more likely to move than married people? So divorced goes on top because of the more, the larger number goes on top. So we would be looking at 17.8% than married people. So the number for married people is 10.2%, and then we subtract 1. So than married, that goes on the bottom. Also large over small because of the more. So that's our equation. You can do these as percentages or you can do them as decimals as long as you are consistent. And when I calculate that, I get 1.745 minus 1, or 0.745. I could write 74.5%. You could round that to 75%. We are not being picky about your rounding. The second one, widowed people are how much less likely to move than married. Than married goes on the bottom. Widowed people goes on the top. That gives us a smaller number over a larger number, so everything looks good. So my calculation would be widowed at 6.6%, and this time I'm going to do it as a decimal, divided by married people at 10.2%, and I subtract 1. And when I punch that into my calculator, I get, don't forget to subtract the 1, negative 0.353, that's 3529, blah, blah, blah. So widowed people are 35.3% less because of that negative sign, less likely to move. And finally, comparing widowed to divorced, pretty much set up exactly like this one. We would have 0.066 divided by 0.178 minus 1. And when you calculate that, you're going to get a somewhat bigger number than in the previous problem because this is a larger difference. So I get negative 0.629, about 62.9% less likely to move than widowed people are. And then we have this question about people with a bachelor's degree and people with a high school grad, where you need to figure out whether it's more or less likely, as well as fill in the number. And we look at this and we see 13.3% of people with a bachelor's degree moved, but only 10.7% of high school graduates. So that tells us that the people with a bachelor's were more likely to move. So that's a more there. Of course, we don't know whether more people with a bachelor's or more high school graduates moved. To know that, you would need to know how many there were of each group. This is allowing us to compare two different pies, but we don't know the relative sizes of them. Anyhow, to finish that off, it's a lot like this first one over here. It's a more, so the larger number goes on top. The bachelor's goes on top, then high school grads goes on the bottom. Multiple ways to figure that out, but you've got to stop and ask yourself which one goes on top, or else, honestly, you're setting yourself up to make a mistake, because human nature is we get it wrong more often than we should if we're just guessing. And when I do that, I get 0.243. So people with a bachelor's are 24.3% more likely to move than high school graduates. Finally, let's look at the question that asks about people moving to a different state at different ages. And as I looked down this list, I saw the people in their early 20s were the most likely to move to a different state. People in their late 20s were almost as likely to move to a different state. And it drops dramatically when you're looking at people either younger or older than that. So that's just my answer to who's most likely to move. And then I asked you to pick another age group to compare them to, and I chose to compare them to roughly their parents, people of their late 40s to early 50s. So let's compare these, and I could choose whether I want to write a more likely or a less likely statement. So I will choose to write a more likely. People ages 20 to 24 are, notice I kind of set it up and then I do the calculation to fill in there. A blank percent more likely to move to a different state. Oops, sorry. Than people ages 45 to 54. So more likely, large over small, people ages 20 to 24 on top, people ages 45 to 54 on the bottom, all these different ways to set it up. I'd be looking at 5.6% over 2% and subtract the 1. And notice those younger people are over twice as likely. So I'm looking for an answer that's over 100%. This is a really big difference. And when I do that calculation, I get 1.8. So what goes in there is the people ages 20 to 24 are, I've turned that back to a percentage. I have to move that decimal place twice. I have to multiply that by 100, are 180% more likely to move to a different state than people ages 54 to 45. If I'd done the calculation the other way around, if I'd asked how much less likely older people were to move than younger people, I would have gotten that the older people were about 64% less likely to move. So that's problem 11.